We're back on SportsLine talking the NHL expansion draft and NHL awards tonight. As we mentioned, James Neal off to Vegas as the pick of the Golden Knights in the expansion draft. Preds GM David Poole, NHL GM of the Year, honored for getting the Preds to the Stanley Cup final for the first time. Poole and head coach Peter Laviolette, we continue now with their discussion, wrapping up this season.
From a player standpoint, a coach standpoint, sometimes you see players on the other side, but you don't really get to know them until you get the opportunity to work with them on a daily basis. He was, I thought that he was a very easy person to work with. Very coachable, listens, can take criticism, can take advice. From his game, you know, being in the East and watching him in the East as a coach more, what I remembered was the dynamic offensive player, which I still think he is. I think he's has an excellent shot. I think his passing is incredible. He can make plays, and he's you know, his offense is something I think that everybody knows about, and probably a reason why we were one of the reasons that we got him. What I learned more than anything is that I think he's a brilliant defensive player. I think that he is a heavy body. I think that he and Matthias Ekholm as a pair were unbelievable with their size and their strength and their reads, their ability to stop opposition's top lines, their ability to get out of our end, to shield pucks, to make a quick move and an outlet pass and get out of our defensive zone as quick as possible, which is really what the game is about. How can you get it out, get it through, and get it in and stay in the opposition's end? So not only is he good in the offensive end, but we had to get there, and that's where he would really shine for me. And like David said, when he came back from some injury trouble in the middle of the season, his game got stronger and stronger up until the last month, where he was, I thought he was lights out, and in the playoffs he really shined. It was almost like his game went to the next level as soon as the playoffs started. And he and Matthias, I thought, were fabulous together.
John, in the middle.
David, wondering if I could pile on two quick questions here. One, wonder if you could update us on Ryan Ellis. I clearly seem to be bothered by something in part of the playoffs. And then also, I know at times in the past you've kind of maybe swung for the fences at the trade deadline in the past, also brought in some big names. Wonder if you could talk about taking the sort of the reverse approach this year and maybe some of the benefits that played out by not making the big trade.
On Ryan Ellis, we need a further medical update on him, so hopefully that'll come next week. But you're correct that he has some issues, and we know the extent of it. We'll let you know that. I think again you bring up a good point. We talked about that a lot at the trading deadline. We've done from nothing to giving up your first pick. It's really a dynamic that I'm not sure of, because sometimes you just get that great fit, and other times you get no fit at all. Even when you get a really good player and he comes to your team and he doesn't fit in, it doesn't make any sense. And next year he goes to another team and he's back to that same player. I think you got to be really careful at the trading deadline on your chemistry and your culture. And as I say, if your team's playing well, you're going to move somebody's cheese. In this case, this year we didn't do that. We just added the depth players. So I don't think we displaced anybody. We just added depth, and I think that was welcomed by our team. We brought in good guys, good veteran guys that wanted to be here, that were, I guess you could say, low maintenance, but were good teammates, and they jumped in there and did a good job when asked. When they weren't playing on a regular basis, they didn't make any waves, and so it was as good as it could be with our team. So it felt like that. The end result speaks for itself, but it felt like it was the right thing to do this year. Just seemed to fit all the things that we were doing in terms of just adding to the depth. It just gave us a little bit more confidence. So again, if next year we get to the same point, I mean, I don't say we're going to do anything or what have you, but it's not a bad way to do it if you're confident in the core of your team.
This is for both you guys. With Pontus, and if you do end up re-signing Freddie, are they shoo-ins to immediately make the team next year, or do you have to manage the success that they had in the playoffs, being that they were very successful and maybe they don't start on the active roster right away?
They're young players that are going to come to training camp and do their best to make our team. I don't want to say that a young player coming in is a shoe-in. They're going to have to work hard this summer and come in and earn their spot. I do think that they opened eyes. Certainly Pontus, I think he's in a little bit of a different spot than Freddie, because Pontus was a guy who has gone through a process over the course of a few years where he's been up and down. Every time that Pontus got sent down this year, he was playing well. He didn't get sent back down because he wasn't ready or that he wasn't able to play at this level. We ran into a numbers situation when numbers were counting and you could only keep 23 active on your roster. And when that time comes and somebody comes back from an injury, we have to move somebody back. And that was the conversation every time that Pontus came up here. When the 23-man roster wasn't in place for the playoffs and you could now have extra players, the plan it was always to have Pontus up here because of his speed and his skill, and possibly jump into a series like Chicago, because we knew that that's how we had to play. And so each series presented different challenges for the players and for me to make sure that the lineup matched the opposition and what we needed to do in order to be successful. I think one of the toughest conversations that I had was talking to Cody McLeod and telling him that he wasn't going to play in Game 1 in Chicago. This guy is a warrior. He's one of the most loved guys in the locker room. He's an unbelievable teammate, unbelievable energy. We just didn't feel like it's set up for him, and there's no way that we make it to the finals without a guy like Cody McLeod going through St. Louis and Anaheim. So those decisions were tough, and Pontus was always part of that plan to come back up here. And he played very well. He's a guy for me that is right there, and it's up to him now to come to camp. And when he does get in the exhibition games and when he does get those opportunities, that's how we're looking at him now. It's not a slam dunk, though. Young players have to come in and earn their spot, but certainly he opened our eyes by the way he played this year and by the way he played in the playoffs. I think Freddie's a little bit of a different story because what he did is incredible. He's a guy who came up here on a very limited basis. He's an unbelievable kid, a great kid. He works hard every day. He's worked his way to a position where he's in Milwaukee, and his name is constantly being brought up as somebody who could come up here and play a very responsible two-way game. He's capable of scoring goals in Milwaukee. He's capable of playing different positions and taking face-offs, and just a real good all-around player. As he came up here, he was a black ace. He was on their crew and worked hard and had just kept a good positive attitude. And again, with the injuries that we sustained through the course of the playoffs, he got an opportunity to jump into the lineup, and what he did is unbelievable. To be a young kid to walk into the finals like that and be able to contribute offensively in the magnitude of the Stanley Cup Finals in Pittsburgh, in our building, speaks volume to him and his game and him and his as a person. It's not an easy thing to do for a young player. It could be very intimidating and very overwhelming, and it was not. He enjoyed it. He played great. He's going to come to camp next year, and he's going to try to earn a spot as well. But again, certainly now we've seen him in a different light up here and know that what he's capable of, and I think that changes our mindset about him as he approaches camp. He'll have to have a good summer and come here and work hard to make our team as well.
Peter, obviously, we look at how many people are outside on the plaza or how many sellouts this season there were, what the local TV ratings were, et cetera. But for the team, how did the fans and the fan support, not just during the playoffs but during the season, how did that help the team, and how important is that even going forward and turning the page into the coming seasons for the team? We
knew we had a special fan base for a couple of years, well, more than that. I've been here for a couple of years, and just the last couple of years, watching how excited they were about the playoff hockey 2 years ago, last year, and certainly this year, we know it's a special group of fans. as the playoffs grew this year, and it just became, and I think that's what happens in the playoff. Everything gets ramped up. The on-ice play, and certainly the fans and their passion get ramped up as the playoffs go on as well. I can promise you that every one of our players saw it. They knew it. They felt it, whether it was in the building, whether they had a TV on, 4 hours before a game or 3 hours before a game, and they're looking at Broadway and Luke Bryan playing up on the rooftop of Tootsie's, and the 100,000 people that were down there from being Preds fans and Music Fest, and the Sea of Gold that turned the corner at Rippey's, and our players 100% felt that. It was part of the fabric of our playoff run here. It would be crazy not to acknowledge the impact that our fans had and our city had on this run.
David, I think every year I've sat in here, I remember you in your opening statement sort of saying this is what has to be different moving forward. Given the success this year, you didn't necessarily say that up front. What's the challenge, though, of what you still need to do to make this team better, if anything? And kind of along those lines, Peter, is the biggest challenge as a coach that as good as this season was, we haven't earned anything for 2017, 2018 yet?
Well, again, it's just a few days after, but I think Hockey Ops is dialed in and focused into what we need to do primarily in these next 3 weeks, kind of define what the majority of what your team is going to be, at least to start the season. I'm very confident of the group, everybody, our coaches, our Hockey Ops, and specifically our players. And the question's been asked to me before. I mean, you can have a playoff hangover. I mean, a short off season. I just feel that our guys have learned so much in the last 2 years. I think they realize how difficult it is to get to this point. What's the saying? I mean, before you buy a house, you gotta go through it and check it all out. And I think now we know that last year we knew what it going to take to win the second round. This year we saw the Stanley Cup. The Stanley Cup was in our building. We were that close to it. I just think we got a really good group. I think they're mature. I think they know what has to take place. So it's going to be a new year next year, and you got to start all over. And you're going to hear me say the only goal is to make the playoffs, and then we'll go from there. But in terms of how I feel about our group and our chances, I'm very confident that we will do everything we can to try to get back to this spot next year.
I echo the same thing about the confidence in our group and the players that we have. I think it's a terrific group. I always work under the assumption we should never assume anything, and we should put our head down, come to training camp, work hard, do the right things, work to become a good team, work to win hockey games, and if you can do those things, you can find yourself competing in the Stanley Cup playoffs. But there's always the work that goes with that. What we did this year and how we grew as a team, that team will have to take on its own identity next year, and we'll have to forge together to become a group that can win hockey games and do those things. So there's always work that has to be done, and I just think it's important that we focus on that when we get to training camp, and we should never assume anything. We should do the work instead.